Ladies and gentlemen, today we embark on a journey through time, exploring the fascinating history of a nation that has shaped the world in many ways. From its ancient origins to its modern innovations, Japan's story is one of resilience, transformation, and deep cultural heritage. Our journey begins over 14,000 years ago, during the Jomon period, when early inhabitants crafted intricate pottery and lived as hunter-gatherers. As time passed, the Yayoi period ushered in agriculture and metalworking, laying the foundations of a structured society. It was during these early centuries that Japan's first ruling clan, the Yamato, began to consolidate power, intertwining political leadership with spiritual traditions that remain influential today. By the 8th century, Japan saw the flourishing of the imperial court in the Nara and Heian periods. Literature, poetry, and art reached new heights, and Buddhism took root alongside native Shinto beliefs. However, as political power shifted, a new era emerged, the Age of the Samurai. For centuries, feudal lords and warriors dominated the land, leading to the rise of powerful shogunates that controlled Japan's destiny. The Sengoku period was marked by civil war and ambition, but from the chaos, a unified Japan emerged under the Tokugawa shogunate. This ushered in the Edo period, an era of peace, stability, and cultural refinement. Japan turned inward, isolating itself from the world for over 2 centuries, allowing traditions such as kabuki theater, tea ceremonies, and sumo wrestling to flourish. Then came a turning point, the Meiji Restoration of 1868. Japan rapidly modernized, embracing Western technology and governmental reforms while maintaining its unique identity. This transformation propelled the nation onto the global stage, leading to remarkable industrial and military growth. The 20th century brought both triumphs and trials. Japan's involvement in global conflicts shaped its course, but from the devastation of war, it rose stronger than ever. The post-war period saw an economic miracle, making Japan a leader in technology, manufacturing, and culture. Today, Japan stands as a beacon of innovation, blending its rich past with a dynamic future. As we reflect on Japan's history, we see a nation that has continuously evolved while holding steadfast to its traditions. It is a story of perseverance, creativity, and an unbreakable spirit, a history that continues to inspire the world. Today, we embark on a journey through the rich and fascinating history of Japan, a nation whose past is deeply woven with cultural evolution, resilience, and transformation. To understand modern Japan, we must first look back to its earliest origins, an age when civilization was only beginning to take root on the Japanese archipelago. Our journey begins in the Jomon period, a time that dates back as far as 14,000 BCE, making it one of the longest prehistoric periods in human history. The term Jomon itself means cord-marked, referring to the distinctive pottery that the people of this era crafted, some of the oldest known in the world. Unlike many early civilizations that rapidly transitioned to agriculture, the Jomon people primarily lived as hunter-gatherers for thousands of years. They relied on Japan's abundant natural resources, fishing in the rich coastal waters, hunting wild game, and gathering nuts, fruits, and plants. What makes this period particularly fascinating is the level of sophistication these early inhabitants achieved despite their prehistoric setting. Archaeological discoveries suggest that Jomon society had a deep sense of culture and spirituality. Many sites reveal ritual objects, clay figurines known as dogu, and shell mounds indicating ceremonial burials. These artifacts hint at a society with spiritual beliefs, possibly an early form of animism, which would later evolve into Japan's indigenous Shinto religion. The Jomon people lived in semi-permanent settlements, often in pit dwellings, which were dug into the ground for insulation against the harsh winters. Some sites suggest that these communities had a sense of organization, trading with other groups, and developing a primitive social structure. Interestingly, while early Jomon life was largely nomadic, later in the period, they began cultivating plants such as millet and beans, foreshadowing the agricultural advancements that would come in the next era. As we move forward in history, around 300 BCE, we enter the Yayoi period, marking a significant shift in Japanese society. This period saw the introduction of rice cultivation, which had a profound impact on the development of Japan. Unlike the Jomon, the Yayoi people adopted a more settled, agrarian lifestyle, and with it came new technologies, bronze and iron tools, weaving, and advanced pottery techniques. These innovations were largely influenced by contact with China and the Korean Peninsula, highlighting Japan's early interactions with its neighbors. With the spread of rice farming, the population grew rapidly, and communities became more structured. Unlike the relatively egalitarian Jomon society, Yayoi culture saw the emergence of social classes, with powerful clan leaders controlling agricultural production and land. This shift laid the foundation for Japan's future political structures and the eventual rise of the Yamato state. Thus, Japan's history begins with an extraordinary period of endurance, adaptation, and cultural expression. From the Jomon people's hunter-gatherer traditions to the Yayoi's agricultural revolution, these early foundations set the stage for the emergence of Japan as a unified and complex civilization. Now, as we move forward in history, we see how these early developments shaped Japan's future, leading to the rise of powerful clans, samurai warriors, and imperial rule. Let us continue this journey through time to uncover how Japan transformed from a land of scattered villages into a powerful nation with a lasting legacy. As we move forward in Japan's history, we enter the Yayoi period, 300 BCE, 300 CE, a transformative era that marked the beginning of organized civilization on the Japanese archipelago. The Yayoi period saw an enormous shift in how people lived, worked, and interacted, ultimately shaping the foundations of Japanese society as we know it today. The most defining characteristic of the Yayoi period was the introduction of rice cultivation, which revolutionized the way people sustained themselves. Unlike the Jomon people, who relied on hunting, fishing, and foraging, the Yayoi people embraced wet rice farming, a practice that likely originated in China and was introduced to Japan via the Korean Peninsula. This shift allowed for a more stable food supply, leading to population growth and the formation of permanent villages. Rice farming required collective labor, irrigation systems, and careful management, fostering cooperation among communities and the beginnings of organized leadership. Alongside agriculture came the adoption of metalworking, another major advancement that set the Yayoi people apart from their predecessors. With the introduction of bronze and iron tools, daily life became more efficient, as iron sickles and plows improved farming and bronze weapons and armor strengthened military capabilities. This technological leap also led to the development of more sophisticated pottery, weapons, and ornaments, signifying the emergence of craftsmanship as a key aspect of Yayoi culture. One of the most significant social changes during this time was the rise of hierarchical society. Unlike the Jomon period, which was relatively egalitarian, Yayoi society became more stratified, with clear distinctions between the ruling elite and common farmers. Clan leaders, or chieftains, began to assert control over land and resources, amassing power and wealth. These early rulers were likely responsible for organizing large-scale irrigation systems and protecting their territories from rival groups. This period marked the birth of Japan's first social and political structures, which would later evolve into powerful feudal domains. Evidence of this social complexity can be seen in burial practices. Archaeologists have discovered large tombs containing weapons, bronze mirrors, and finely crafted pottery, indicating that some individuals held higher status than others. This suggests that the Yayoi period was the beginning of a class-based society, with an emerging warrior class that would later evolve into the samurai. The increase in agriculture and social organization also led to early warfare. As groups competed for fertile land, conflicts became more common, leading to the fortification of settlements and the development of better weapons. These small-scale wars among clans foreshadowed the later power struggles that would define much of Japan's medieval history. Another important aspect of the Yayoi period was cultural exchange. Japan was no longer an isolated society. It was increasingly influenced by its neighbors, particularly China and Korea. This is evident in the spread of Chinese writing systems, bronze casting techniques, and new religious beliefs. Many historians believe that during this period, Shinto beliefs began to take shape, laying the foundation for Japan's indigenous spirituality. As the Yayoi period came to an end around 300 CE, Japan was no longer just a collection of scattered villages. Instead, regional powers had emerged, controlling vast agricultural lands and engaging in trade and warfare. This era set the stage for the rise of the Yamato state, which would unify Japan and establish the foundations of imperial rule. Thus, the Yayoi period was not just a time of agricultural innovation, it was a turning point in Japanese history that saw the development of social hierarchy, organized warfare, technological advancement, and international influence. This transformation laid the groundwork for the centuries to come, shaping the identity of Japan as a structured and dynamic civilization. As Japan transitioned from the Yayoi period, a new and powerful force began to emerge, the Yamato clan. This period, roughly spanning from 300 CE to 710 CE, marks the first time in Japan's history when a single ruling power began to consolidate control over the land. The rise of the Yamato clan was not just a political shift, but also a transformative era that shaped Japan's culture, religion, governance, and foreign relations. The Yamato clan originated in the Kansai region, particularly around present-day Nara Prefecture. They were one of many ruling clans during this time, but through strategic alliances, military strength, and effective governance, they gradually established dominance over other regional leaders. The Yamato rulers claimed divine descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu, a belief that legitimized their rule and set the foundation for Japan's imperial lineage, which continues to this day. One of the defining aspects of the Yamato period was the introduction and expansion of Shintoism, Japan's indigenous spiritual tradition. Although Shinto beliefs had existed in earlier times, the Yamato rulers formalized the worship of kami, or spirits, associating their lineage with the deities of the land. This religious belief was used to reinforce their authority, as they were seen as both political leaders and divine figures. Shintoism's emphasis on nature, ancestor worship, and purification rituals became deeply ingrained in Japanese culture and remains influential today. During this period, Japan also saw increased interaction with China and Korea, which played a significant role in shaping its society. The Yamato rulers sought knowledge and technological advancements from their continental neighbors. One of the most profound influences was the introduction of Buddhism in the 6th century, brought to Japan through Korean emissaries. Initially, there was resistance to this foreign religion, but eventually, it gained widespread acceptance and was even promoted by members of the ruling class. Prince Shotoku, one of Japan's most famous historical figures, was a strong supporter of Buddhism. He not only encouraged its spread, but also introduced political and legal reforms inspired by Chinese Confucian principles. Prince Shotoku's impact on Japan was immense. He introduced the 17-article constitution, which emphasized moral governance, respect for authority, and the importance of harmony within society. This document was one of Japan's first attempts at a centralized government and was heavily influenced by the Chinese system of administration. Under his leadership, Japan also began sending official envoys to China, known as the Kenzushi missions, to study governance, culture, and technology. These missions brought back new knowledge, including advances in writing, architecture, and philosophy, which helped shape early Japanese civilization. Another key development of the Yamato period was the Kofun culture, named after the large burial mounds, kofun, constructed for powerful leaders. These tombs, some of which are massive in scale, serve as evidence of the Yamato rulers' increasing wealth and influence. Many of these kofun contain treasures such as bronze mirrors, armor, and weapons, showcasing the growing complexity of Yamato society. The largest of these, the Daisen Kofun in Osaka, is believed to be the resting place of Emperor Nintoku and remains one of the most significant ancient structures in Japan. During this time, Japan was still a fragmented land with various clans maintaining local control, but the Yamato rulers skillfully used diplomacy, military campaigns, and religious authority to unify these groups under their leadership. They also formalized a system of uji, clan-based rule, where influential families maintain their own territories while pledging loyalty to the Yamato court. This system would later evolve into the feudal structures that dominated medieval Japan. By the end of the Yamato period, the foundations of Japan's imperial state had been established. The influence of China and Korea had shaped Japanese governance, religion, and culture, while the Yamato rulers had succeeded in asserting their dominance. This period set the stage for the Nara and Heian periods, where Japan would continue to develop its unique identity, blending foreign influences with indigenous traditions. As Japan moved beyond the Yamato period, it entered an era of remarkable cultural, political, and religious development. The Nara 710 to 794 and Heian 794 to 1185 periods. This time saw the emergence of a centralized government, the flourishing of literature and arts, and the deep integration of Buddhism alongside native Shinto beliefs. It was a golden age of refinement, diplomacy, and intellectual advancement that would leave a lasting mark on Japan's cultural identity. The Nara period 710 to 794, the birth of centralized rule. The Nara period began with the establishment of Japan's first permanent capital in Nara in 710. Previously, the capital moved frequently due to Shinto beliefs regarding death and purification, but adopting a fixed capital marked a significant shift toward political stability and centralized governance. The city of Nara was heavily inspired by Chang'an, the capital of China's Tang dynasty, reflecting Japan's continued admiration for Chinese political and cultural models. During this period, the imperial court, led by the Fujiwara clan, solidified its control over Japan. The government implemented Taiho Code 702 CE, a legal system based on the Chinese Confucian bureaucratic model. This marked Japan's first attempt at a structured civil administration, with appointed officials overseeing various aspects of governance. The emperor, once seen primarily as a religious figure, became the political center of the state, although powerful aristocratic families, such as the Fujiwara, increasingly influenced decision-making. Religion played a crucial role in the Nara period, particularly the spread of Buddhism. Though introduced during the Yamato period, Buddhism was now fully embraced by the ruling class, leading to the construction of grand temples, such as Todaiji, which houses the great Buddha, Daibutsu in Nara. Emperor Shomu, a devout Buddhist, commissioned this massive statue as a symbol of unity and protection for the nation. Monks such as Gyoki and Kukai traveled across Japan, establishing monasteries and spreading Buddhist teachings. However, the growing power of Buddhist institutions also led to conflicts, as some temples began influencing politics, creating tensions with the imperial court. Despite these achievements, the Nara period also faced challenges. The land taxation system, which allocated land to farmers in exchange for tax payments, started to fail as influential aristocrats and Buddhist temples acquired large estates, exempt from taxation. This shift led to economic instability and the rise of private land ownership, a trend that would shape Japan's future feudal system. The Heian period, 794 to 1185, the pinnacle of Japanese court culture. In 794, Emperor Kanmu moved the capital from Nara to Heian-kyo, modern-day Kyoto, to escape the growing influence of Buddhist monasteries in politics. This move marked the beginning of the Heian period, an era of refinement, aristocratic rule, and the blossoming of uniquely Japanese culture. The Heian period saw the Fujiwara clan rise to supreme power, dominating the imperial court through strategic marriages and political maneuvering. While emperors remained the symbolic rulers, real power rested in the hands of the Fujiwara regents, who controlled state affairs. This period marked a shift from a Chinese-style bureaucracy to a more court-centered aristocratic system, where power was concentrated among a small elite class. One of the most significant contributions of the Heian period was its artistic and literary achievements. The imperial court in Kyoto became the epicenter of culture, where poetry, calligraphy, and painting flourished. The kana writing system, hiragana and katakana, was developed, allowing for a more fluid and expressive form of writing, distinct from Chinese characters. This advancement gave rise to some of Japan's greatest literary works, including The Tale of Genji, written by Murasaki Shikibu, often considered the world's first novel. It provides a vivid depiction of court life and the complexities of human emotions. The Pillow Book, written by Sei Shogun, a collection of witty and poetic observations about Heian society. These works not only showcase the elegance of Heian culture, but also cemented women's role in Japanese literary history, as female authors played a crucial role in documenting life at court. The Heian period also witnessed the evolution of Japanese aesthetics. The concept of miyabi, courtly refinement, emphasized elegance, subtlety, and the appreciation of beauty. Aristocrats engaged in poetry contests, incense blending, and elaborate clothing traditions, setting standards for Japanese artistic expression that persists today. However, while the court indulged in artistic pursuits, the country's political and economic foundations began to weaken. The shogun system, where aristocrats and religious institutions controlled tax-exempt private estates, led to the decline of centralized power. Local landowners, often warriors, started asserting independence, and the imperial court gradually lost its ability to govern the entire country. This growing militarization of regional lords would soon give rise to the samurai class, setting the stage for a dramatic shift in Japan's political landscape. By the end of the Heian period, Japan was on the brink of a new era, one dominated by the rise of the samurai and the establishment of the first shogunate. As Japan transitioned from the refined and aristocratic Heian period, a new force began to take shape, one that would redefine the nation's social and political landscape for centuries: the samurai. The rise of the samurai class and the establishment of feudal Japan marked a turning point in history, shifting power away from the imperial court and into the hands of military rulers. This era, spanning from 1185 to 1600, saw the dominance of the shogunate system, a highly structured military government that shaped Japan's future. The rise of the samurai and the Kamakura shogunate, 1185 to 1333. The weakening of the imperial court in the late Heian period allowed regional warlords to amass power. Many of these warlords were samurai, skilled warriors who lived by the code of Bushido, a strict set of values emphasizing loyalty, honor, and discipline. The two most powerful warrior clans, the Taira and Minamoto, clashed in a fierce struggle known as the Genpei War, 1180 to 1185. After years of brutal battles, the Minamoto clan emerged victorious under the leadership of Minamoto no Yoritomo, who established the first shogunate in Japanese history, the Kamakura shogunate, in 1192. Under Yoritomo's rule, political power shifted from the aristocracy in Kyoto to the military government in Kamakura. The emperor remained a symbolic figure, but real authority rested with the shogun, the military dictator who controlled the country through a network of samurai vassals. This was the beginning of feudal Japan, where local lords, or daimyo, governed vast territories and pledged allegiance to the shogunate. The Kamakura period saw Japan's society become increasingly militarized, with samurai culture deeply ingrained in governance, warfare, and daily life. One of the most defining events of this period was Mongol invasions of Japan, 1274 and 1281. Under Kublai Khan, the Mongol Empire launched massive invasions, forcing the samurai to defend Japan against an overwhelming foreign threat. Despite their military strength, the Mongols struggled to maintain supply lines across the sea. In both invasions, Japan was saved by divine winds, or kamikaze, typhoons that destroyed much of the Mongol fleet. This event reinforced the samurai's belief in divine protection and solidified the shogunate's prestige. However, the financial strain of defending against the Mongols weakened the Kamakura government, leading to internal unrest and eventual downfall. The Ashikaga shogunate and the rise of feudal lords, 1336 to 1573. Following the collapse of the Kamakura shogunate, a period of political instability ensued until Ashikaga Takauji, a former Kamakura loyalist, seized power and established the Ashikaga shogunate in 1336. The new government was centered in Kyoto, restoring some of the imperial court's influence, but it remained a military-controlled society where the daimyo held significant power. During the Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573, the Ashikaga shogunate oversaw a flourishing of Japanese culture, particularly in the arts, architecture, and theater. The influence of Zen Buddhism became widespread, shaping samurai philosophy, tea ceremonies, and garden designs. No theater, a highly stylized form of drama, emerged as an important cultural expression. However, while art and culture flourished, the Ashikaga shogunate was politically weak, struggling to control the growing power of regional daimyo. This weakness led to the Unin War, 1467 to 1477, a devastating conflict that plunged Japan into chaos. The war marked the beginning of the Sengoku period, 1467 to 1600, also known as the Warring States period, where powerful daimyo fought for supremacy, leading to a fragmented and violent society. The Warring States period and the rise of the three unifiers. The Sengoku period was an era of near-constant warfare, where samurai lords battled each other for dominance. Castles were built across the country, alliances were made and broken, and mercenary groups, known as ronin, masterless samurai, roamed the land. It was a time of intense political and military turmoil, but it also set the stage for the unification of Japan under three powerful leaders. Oda Nobunaga, 1534 to 1582, a ruthless and brilliant military strategist. Nobunaga defeated many rival daimyo and took control of Kyoto. He introduced gunpowder warfare, adopting firearms from Portuguese traders, and sought to dismantle the traditional samurai order. However, he was assassinated in 1582 before completing his mission. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, 1537 to 1598, Nobunaga's successor, Hideyoshi continued the unification efforts, conquering most of Japan and centralizing power. He implemented social reforms, including a policy that restricted samurai from becoming farmers or merchants, solidifying their status as a warrior class. He also launched ambitious but ultimately unsuccessful invasions of Korea. Tokugawa Ieyasu, 1543 to 1616, the final unifier of Japan, Ieyasu defeated his rivals at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, paving the way for the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate, which would rule Japan for over 250 years. With the victory of Tokugawa Ieyasu at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, Japan entered a new phase of governance, one that would bring stability, isolation, and a rigid social structure for over 250 years. This period, known as the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, was marked by the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate, which implemented strict policies to maintain control over the country. Under Tokugawa rule, Japan flourished economically and culturally, yet remained politically isolated from the outside world. The establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate, 1603 to 1868. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu was officially appointed shogun by the emperor, making Edo, modern-day Tokyo, the new seat of power. Unlike previous shogunates, which had struggled with internal divisions and weak control over the daimyo, the Tokugawa regime created a highly structured feudal system that centralized power. The emperor remained in Kyoto as a symbolic ruler, but the shogun had complete political authority. To maintain control over the daimyo, Tokugawa Ieyasu introduced the Senkenkotai, alternate attendance system. Under this policy, daimyo were required to spend every other year in Edo, leaving their families as hostages when they returned to their domains. This prevented them from amassing too much power and ensured their loyalty to the shogunate. It also contributed to economic growth, as the constant travel of daimyo and their large entourages stimulated trade and infrastructure development. The Tokugawa rulers also enforced a strict social hierarchy based on Confucian principles. Society was divided into four rigid classes. Samurai, the ruling warrior class, who served as bureaucrats and administrators rather than just fighters. Farmers, considered the backbone of society, as they produced the food necessary for survival. Artisans, craftsmen, and workers who created goods but held lower status than farmers. Merchants, despite accumulating wealth through trade, they were placed at the bottom of the social order because they did not produce goods themselves. This hierarchy was strictly enforced, and movement between classes was nearly impossible. The samurai, although still highly respected, were no longer warriors engaged in constant battles. Instead, they became bureaucrats, teachers, and administrators, living on government stipends. Over time, many of them struggled financially as their incomes remained fixed while inflation and economic changes made their traditional way of life difficult to sustain. The policy of Sakoku, Japan's isolation from the world. One of the defining characteristics of the Edo period was the policy of Sakoku, closed country, which was officially enacted in the 1630s by Tokugawa Iemitsu, the third shogun. Fearing foreign influence and internal rebellion, the shogunate strictly controlled foreign trade and prohibited most forms of contact with the outside world. Christianity was banned, and those suspected of practicing the religion were persecuted. This was due to fears that Christian missionaries, particularly from Spain and Portugal, were undermining the shogunate's authority and encouraging rebellion. Foreign trade was restricted to specific ports, with only the Dutch and Chinese permitted to trade under strict conditions at Dejima, an artificial island in Nagasaki. The Dutch were allowed to stay because they focused solely on commerce and did not attempt to spread Christianity. Japanese citizens were forbidden from traveling abroad, and those who left were not allowed to return. This isolationist policy helped preserve Japan's traditional culture and prevent foreign colonization, but it also meant that Japan missed out on many technological and intellectual developments occurring in the rest of the world, particularly during the Industrial Revolution. Economic and cultural prosperity in Edo, Japan. Despite its isolation, Japan experienced significant economic growth during the Edo period. Urban centers like Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto flourished, becoming hubs of commerce, art, and culture. The development of a domestic market economy led to the rise of wealthy merchant families, some of whom became more financially powerful than the struggling samurai class. A key cultural development of this time was the rise of the floating world, ukiyo, a vibrant urban culture centered around entertainment districts in cities. The Kabuki Theater, famous for its elaborate costumes and dramatic performances, became immensely popular among both the common people and samurai. Meanwhile, woodblock printing, ukiyo-e, became a defining artistic style, depicting beautiful landscapes, famous actors, and scenes from daily life. Artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige created masterpieces that are still admired today. In literature, haiku poetry, perfected by poets like Matsuo Basho, became a widely appreciated art form, capturing deep emotions in just a few syllables. Despite the restrictions on foreign trade, Japan still engaged in limited intellectual exchanges with the Dutch, which led to the emergence of Rangaku, Dutch learning. Scholars studied Western medicine, astronomy, and technology, incorporating new scientific knowledge while maintaining Japan's cultural identity. Signs of decline and the end of the Edo period. By the early 19th century, cracks began to appear in the Tokugawa system. Several factors contributed to the weakening of the shogunate's authority. Economic problems. The rigid social hierarchy, which favored the samurai and restricted economic mobility, led to financial struggles. Many samurai found themselves in debt, while merchants, despite their wealth, were denied political influence. Natural disasters and famines, crop failures and famines, such as the Tenpo famine, 1833 to 1837, led to widespread suffering and social unrest. Peasant uprisings and revolts increased in frequency. Foreign pressure. While Japan had remained isolated for centuries, foreign powers, particularly the United States, Britain, and Russia, began demanding that Japan open its ports. This growing instability set the stage for the arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States in 1853, whose fleet of black ships forced Japan to reconsider its isolationist policies. As the Edo period drew to a close, Japan faced mounting internal struggles and increasing foreign pressure, leading to one of the most dramatic transformations in its history, the Meiji Restoration, 1868. This event marked the end of samurai rule and feudalism, the dismantling of the Tokugawa shogunate, and the birth of a modern, industrialized Japan. The restoration was not just a political change, but a complete restructuring of Japan's government, economy, military, and society, propelling the nation into the global stage as a major power. The decline of the Tokugawa shogunate and the arrival of foreign powers. By the mid-19th century, the Tokugawa shogunate was struggling to maintain control. Although Japan had enjoyed centuries of peace and economic stability under Sakoku, isolationist policy, it had also fallen behind technologically compared to the Western world. Meanwhile, European nations and the United States, driven by industrialization and imperial expansion, sought new trade markets in Asia. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States arrived in Japan with a fleet of heavily armed black ships, demanding that Japan open its ports to trade. The Tokugawa government, recognizing that it lacked the military technology to resist, reluctantly signed the Treaty of Kanagawa, 1854, ending Japan's 200-year-old policy of isolation. This treaty granted the U.S. access to Japanese ports and led to similar agreements with other Western nations. However, these treaties were heavily unequal and deeply humiliating for Japan. They imposed extraterritoriality, meaning foreigners were not subject to Japanese law, and allowed Western nations to dictate trade terms that favored their economies over Japan's. Many Japanese, especially samurai and intellectuals, saw this as a national disgrace and called for drastic reforms to strengthen the country. The growing anti-Tokugawa sentiment and the fall of the shogunate. The shogunate's decision to comply with Western demands angered many daimyo and samurai, particularly in powerful domains like Choshu and Satsuma, who believed that Japan needed to resist foreign influence and restore imperial rule. These domains, despite once being under the shogunate's control, began forming their own military and political alliances to challenge the Tokugawa government. In 1863 and 1864, Choshu and Satsuma forces clashed with Western powers in violent skirmishes, such as the bombardment of Kagoshima and the Shimonoseki campaign, which demonstrated Japan's military weakness. However, rather than submitting to defeat, these domains modernized their armies, adopting Western-style weapons, military training, and naval tactics. Over time, they grew powerful enough to challenge the shogunate directly. The movement to restore the emperor as the true ruler of Japan gained momentum, with slogans like Sano Joy, Revere the Emperor, Expel the Barbarians, becoming rallying cries for revolutionaries. By 1867, the pressure on the shogunate was immense, and the last Tokugawa shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, reluctantly agreed to step down in an attempt to avoid civil war. However, anti-shogun forces, led by Choshu and Satsuma samurai, were not satisfied with a peaceful transition. The Boshin War, 1868 to 1869, and the overthrow of the shogunate. In January 1868, the Boshin War began, a civil war between the Tokugawa loyalists and the imperial forces seeking to restore full power to Emperor Meiji. The imperial army, despite being smaller, had modern weapons and support from westernized domains like Choshu and Satsuma. Key battles such as the Battle of Toba-Fushimi, 1868, imperial forces decisively defeated the Tokugawa army, forcing Yoshinobu to flee to Edo, Tokyo. The fall of Edo, 1868, the Tokugawa capital surrendered peacefully after negotiations, preventing massive bloodshed. The Battle of Hakodate, 1869, the final stand of Tokugawa loyalists in Hokkaido, where they attempted to establish an independent republic before ultimately surrendering. By mid-1869, the war had ended, and the Tokugawa shogunate was officially abolished. Emperor Meiji, now at the age of 15, became the symbol of a new, modern Japan. The Meiji Restoration, the birth of modern Japan. With the fall of the shogunate, Japan underwent a massive political, economic, and social transformation to catch up with the West and avoid the fate of colonized nations like China and India. The new government, led by former samurai from Choshu and Satsuma, introduced radical reforms that reshaped the country. 1. Centralization of power and abolition of feudalism. The first major reform was the abolition of the feudal system. In 1871, the domains, Han, controlled by daimyo were dissolved, and the country was divided into modern prefectures, governed directly by officials appointed by the emperor. The daimyo lost their traditional power, and the samurai class was officially disbanded. Without their government stipends, many samurai struggled to adjust to the new economy. Some became bureaucrats, businessmen, or military officers, while others resisted the changes, leading to uprisings like the Satsuma Rebellion, 1877, led by Seigo Takamori, one of the last true samurai. However, the government's newly modernized army, equipped with Western weapons, crushed the rebellion, solidifying the end of the samurai era. 2. Modernization of the military. Recognizing the superiority of Western military technology, the Meiji government built a modern, conscription-based army modeled after Prussia, Germany, and a navy inspired by Britain. In 1873, Japan introduced universal military conscription, requiring all men, regardless of social status, to serve in the army. This was a drastic shift from the samurai-dominated military of the past. 3. Industrialization and economic growth. The government aggressively pursued industrialization, building railways, factories, shipyards, and communication networks. The slogan, Fukoku Kyohei, rich country, strong military, guided national policy, emphasizing both economic strength and military power. Western-style banks, currency systems, and stock exchanges were introduced, paving the way for Japan's rapid economic rise. One of the most significant developments was the creation of zaibatsu, large industrial conglomerates such as Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, and Mitsui, which played a crucial role in Japan's modernization. These powerful family-run companies became the backbone of Japan's economy, funding industrial and technological advancements. 4. Educational and social reforms. To create a more skilled and literate workforce, Japan established a compulsory education system modeled after Western schools. Students were taught not only math, science, and literature, but also nationalistic ideals and loyalty to the emperor. Western-style universities were established, and study-abroad programs sent Japanese students to the US and Europe to learn about modern technology and governance. Meanwhile, Japan adopted aspects of Western fashion, architecture, and lifestyle, blending them with traditional customs. The capital, Edo, was renamed Tokyo, and modern infrastructure, such as telegraph lines and streetlights, transformed urban life. The path to a modern empire. By the late 19th century, Japan had completely transformed from a feudal society into a modern industrial power. However, this newfound strength also fueled imperial ambitions, leading Japan toward military expansion and conflicts with China and Russia. With the successful modernization brought by the Meiji Restoration, Japan entered a new era of military strength and territorial expansion. The rapid industrialization of the late 19th century allowed Japan to build a powerful army and navy, enabling it to challenge Western imperial powers and rival nations in East Asia. Over the next several decades, Japan emerged as an imperial power, defeating China and Russia in major wars, colonizing Korea and Taiwan, and expanding its influence across the Pacific. This period, known as Imperial Japan, 1895 to 1945, was marked by military victories, economic growth, nationalist ideology, and increasing militarism, eventually leading the country into World War II. 1. The First Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, defeating China. One of Japan's first steps toward empire building was challenging China's influence in Korea. At the time, Korea was under China's control through the Qing dynasty, but Japan saw it as a strategically important territory. When a Korean rebellion broke out in 1894, both China and Japan sent troops, leading to the First Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895. Surprising the world, Japan's modernized military crushed the Chinese forces both on land and at sea. Using Western-style warships, rifles, and artillery, Japan demonstrated its newfound strength. The war ended with the Treaty of Shimonoseki, 1895, which forced China to recognize Korea's independence, though Japan would later take control of it. Cede Taiwan and the Pescadores Islands to Japan, marking its first official colony. Pay a large war indemnity, fueling Japan's economic growth. Japan's victory shocked the world, especially Western nations, who had long viewed China as the dominant power in East Asia. However, Russia, France, and Germany forced Japan to return some territorial gains, leading to deep resentment within Japan and a growing desire to confront Western interference in its affairs. 2. The Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, defeating a European power. Japan's next target was Russia, which had been expanding its influence in Manchuria and Korea. Tensions between the two nations escalated when Russia refused to withdraw troops from Manchuria after the Boxer Rebellion, 1899 to 1901. Japan, fearing Russian dominance in the region, launched a surprise attack on Port Arthur, now Lushengkou, China, in 1904, beginning the Russo-Japanese War. Despite being a smaller nation, Japan's military was highly disciplined, well-equipped, and tactically superior. The war saw massive battles on land and sea, including the Battle of Mukden, 1905, one of the largest land battles in history at the time, where Japan defeated Russian forces in Manchuria. The Battle of Tsushima, 1905, a decisive naval battle where Japan annihilated the Russian Baltic Fleet, cementing its dominance at sea. The war ended with the Treaty of Portsmouth, 1905, mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. As a result, Japan gained control of Port Arthur and the Liaodong Peninsula, took over southern Sakhalin Island from Russia, secured dominance over Korea, leading to its eventual annexation. This was the first time an Asian power had defeated a European nation in modern warfare, proving that Japan was now a major global power. Across Asia, this victory inspired nationalist movements that sought to resist Western colonial rule. However, within Japan, military expansionism and nationalism grew even stronger, fueling ambitions for further conquests. 3. The annexation of Korea, 1910, establishing a colonial empire. With Russia weakened and China in decline, Japan fully annexed Korea in 1910, turning it into a colony. This marked a new phase in Japan's imperial ambitions, as it sought to expand its influence throughout Asia. The Japanese government suppressed Korean culture, language, and resistance movements, forcing Korean people to adopt Japanese names, education, and customs. Japan also began large-scale industrial development in Korea, exploiting its resources for the benefit of the Japanese economy. Railways, factories, and infrastructure projects were built, but they primarily served Japan's strategic interests rather than benefiting the Korean people. Resistance movements, such as the March First Movement, 1919, were violently suppressed. 4. Japan in World War I, 1914 to 1918, expanding into the Pacific. When World War I broke out in Europe, 1914, Japan sided with Britain and the Allied powers. Though Japan did not play a major role in European battles, it used the war as an opportunity to seize German-controlled territories in Asia and the Pacific, including Tsingtao, China, a German naval base that Japan captured in 1914. The Mariana, Caroline, and Marshall Islands, German colonies in the Pacific that Japan occupied and later governed under the League of Nations mandate. Japan emerged from the war stronger than ever, gaining new territories and economic influence. However, tensions with Western powers grew when Japan proposed the Racial Equality Clause at the Treaty of Versailles, 1919, which was rejected by the U.S. and Britain. This rejection deepened anti-Western sentiment in Japan and strengthened the belief that Japan needed to expand further to secure its place in the world. 5. Economic growth and rising militarism in the 1920s, 1930s. During the 1920s, Japan experienced rapid economic and industrial growth, becoming one of the largest economies in the world. However, the Great Depression, 1929, caused severe economic hardship, leading to political instability and rising nationalism. Militarists and ultranationalists blamed Western powers for Japan's struggles and pushed for more territorial expansion. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, setting up a puppet state called Manchukuo under Puyi, the last emperor of China. This act was condemned by the League of Nations, but Japan ignored international criticism and withdrew from the League in 1933. This marked the beginning of Japan's increasing defiance against Western diplomatic pressure. By the late 1930s, Japan's military had gained significant control over the government, leading the country down a path of aggressive imperialism. This would soon result in a full-scale war with China and, eventually, involvement in World War II. 6. The Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 1945. The road to World War II. In 1937, Japan launched a full invasion of China, beginning the Second Sino-Japanese War. This brutal conflict saw large-scale atrocities, including the infamous Nanjing Massacre, 1937 to 1938, where Japanese forces committed horrific war crimes against Chinese civilians. The war drained Japan's resources, but also hardened its militarist policies, pushing the country toward further expansion. As the war in China dragged on, Japan sought to expand its empire further into Southeast Asia, where valuable resources such as oil, rubber, and tin could support its war machine. However, this expansion put Japan on a collision course with the United States and Western powers, who saw Japanese aggression as a direct threat to their colonies in Asia. In response, the U.S. imposed economic sanctions and oil embargoes, further straining Japan's economy. Facing a severe shortage of resources, Japan's military leaders believed that war with the United States was inevitable. This led to the fateful decision to attack Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, drawing Japan into World War II on the side of the Axis powers. With the outbreak of World War II, 1939 to 1945, Japan entered its most aggressive and ambitious phase of expansion, seeking to establish itself as the dominant power in the Pacific. By aligning with the Axis powers, Germany and Italy, Japan pursued a strategy of rapid territorial conquest, aiming to secure vital resources and eliminate Western influence in Asia. This period, known as the rise and fall of Imperial Japan during World War II, saw both incredible military victories and devastating defeats, ultimately leading to Japan's surrender and occupation by Allied forces. 1. The attack on Pearl Harbor, 1941. Japan enters World War II. By the late 1930s, Japan's military government saw war with the United States, Britain, and their allies as inevitable. The U.S. had placed economic sanctions on Japan, cutting off critical supplies of oil, rubber, and steel, resources Japan needed to sustain its war effort in China and Southeast Asia. With its economy and military at risk, Japan's leaders, particularly Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, decided on a bold and risky strategy, a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a devastating air raid on Pearl Harbor, sinking or damaging over a dozen battleships and killing thousands of American personnel. The attack temporarily crippled the U.S. Navy, allowing Japan to launch a series of rapid conquests across the Pacific. However, the attack also had unintended consequences. The U.S. and Britain declared war on Japan, bringing their massive industrial and military power into the fight. The attack united the American public, fueling a long-term commitment to Japan's defeat. Despite this, Japan's military leadership believed they could achieve victory before the U.S. could fully mobilize. 2. Japan's lightning conquests, 1941 to 1942. The empire expands. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan launched a series of lightning-fast invasions across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, overwhelming colonial forces and seizing key territories, including the Philippines, 1942, defeating U.S. and Filipino forces, leading to the infamous Bataan Death March, where thousands of prisoners of war, POWs, died from mistreatment. Malaya and Singapore, 1942, crushing British forces and capturing Singapore, the Gibraltar of the East. Indonesia, Dutch East Indies, 1942, gaining control of rich oil fields crucial for Japan's war effort. Burma, Thailand, and the Pacific Islands, expanding its reach across vast territories. At its height, Japan's empire stretched from Alaska's Aleutian Islands in the north to New Guinea in the south, and from Burma in the west to the mid-Pacific Islands in the east. It was one of the largest territorial expansions in history, and Japan appeared unstoppable. 3. The turning point. The Battle of Midway, 1942. Despite its early victories, Japan's expansion was unsustainable. The U.S., with its vast industrial power, rebuilt its fleet quickly and cracked Japan's military codes. This led to the Battle of Midway, June 1942, one of the most decisive battles in history. At Midway, the U.S. Navy launched a surprise counterattack, sinking 4 Japanese aircraft carriers and crippling Japan's ability to project power across the Pacific. The loss of these carriers, along with experienced pilots, marked the beginning of Japan's decline. From this point forward, Japan was forced into defensive battles, retreating under increasing pressure from the Allies. 4. The Island Hopping Campaign, 1943 to 1945. The U.S. strikes back. With Japan weakened, the Allies launched a brutal island hopping campaign, systematically recapturing territory across the Pacific. Major battles included Guadalcanal, 1942 to 1943, the first major U.S. offensive, marking Japan's first significant land defeat. The Battle of Saipan, 1944, bringing U.S. bombers within striking distance of Japan. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, 1944, the largest naval battle in history, where Japan's navy was decisively defeated. Iwo Jima, 1945, a bloody battle where U.S. Marines captured the island, enabling bombing raids on Tokyo. Okinawa, 1945, the deadliest battle of the Pacific War, with massive civilian casualties and the first widespread use of kamikaze suicide attacks. By mid-1945, Japan's defenses had crumbled, its navy was nearly destroyed, and its cities were being relentlessly bombed by the U.S. Air Force. 5. The firebombing of Tokyo and the atomic bombs, 1945. As Japan refused to surrender, the U.S. began a devastating campaign of firebombing Japanese cities. The worst attack occurred on March 9 to 10, 1945, when Tokyo was firebombed, killing over 100,000 civilians in a single night, more than the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Despite this destruction, Japan's military leaders remained defiant. To force Japan's surrender, the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs. Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. Over 140,000 people were killed instantly or died from radiation. Nagasaki, August 9, 1945. Over 70,000 people perished. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a historic radio broadcast, marking the end of World War II. 6. Japan's surrender and Allied occupation, 1945 to 1952. Following its defeat, Japan was occupied by Allied forces, led by U.S. General Douglas MacArthur. The occupation brought sweeping reforms aimed at demilitarizing Japan and rebuilding it as a peaceful, democratic nation. Key reforms included disbanding the Imperial Army and Navy. Japan was stripped of its military power. The new Constitution, 1947, known as the Peace Constitution, it renounced war and outlawed offensive military forces. Political and economic reforms, land reforms, labor rights, and democratization transformed Japan into a modern state. Japan's imperial era had officially ended. The nation that had once sought to dominate Asia now turned towards rebuilding itself as an economic powerhouse, embracing peace, democracy, and global cooperation. After the devastation of World War II, Japan faced an uncertain future. Its cities lay in ruins, its economy was shattered, and its people were struggling with food shortages and a lack of resources. However, what followed was one of the most extraordinary transformations in modern history: Japan's rise from the ashes of war to become one of the world's most powerful economic and technological giants. This period, often referred to as the Japanese Economic Miracle, 1950s, 1990s, was fueled by political stability, U.S. support, industrial innovation, and a hardworking population. The occupation of Japan, 1945 to 1952, under General Douglas MacArthur played a crucial role in reshaping the nation, introducing democratic governance, land reforms, and a new pacifist constitution. As Japan transitioned from an imperial power to a peaceful democracy, its industries were rebuilt, its education system reformed, and its businesses began laying the foundation for an economic revolution that would shock the world. 1. The American occupation and post-war reforms, 1945 to 1952. Following its unconditional surrender on August 15, 1945, Japan was placed under the control of the Allied powers, primarily led by the United States. The occupation was unlike any Japan had experienced before. Rather than punishing the country severely, the U.S. focused on rebuilding Japan as a peaceful, democratic, and economically stable nation. Key reforms during this period included the new Japanese Constitution, 1947. This document, often called the Peace Constitution, replaced Japan's militaristic government with a parliamentary democracy. Most notably, Article 9 of the Constitution renounced war, meaning Japan could no longer maintain an offensive military. Political democratization. The emperor's role was reduced to a symbolic figurehead, and universal suffrage was introduced, allowing women to vote for the first time. Land reforms. Large estates owned by landlords were broken up and redistributed to farmers, creating a stronger, more independent agricultural sector. Economic and labor reforms. Workers were given new rights, including the right to unionize and improved working conditions. These changes paved the way for stability and economic growth. By 1952, when the occupation ended, Japan had regained its sovereignty, but its society had been completely reshaped for a new future. 2. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, the unexpected economic boost. Just as Japan was beginning to recover, an unexpected event accelerated its economic growth, the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950. When war erupted between North and South Korea, the United States and United Nations needed military supplies, equipment, and logistics support. Due to Japan's close proximity, the U.S. used Japan as a supply base, providing an immediate economic stimulus. This war acted as a catalyst for Japan's industrial revival, as Japanese factories produced goods for the U.S. military, leading to a massive increase in production of steel, textiles, and heavy machinery. A surge in employment, reducing post-war unemployment rates. New investments in infrastructure such as roads, railways, and ports. By the time the war ended in 1953, Japan's economy was no longer just recovering, it was rapidly growing. This growth marked the beginning of Japan's industrial boom, setting the stage for decades of expansion. 3. The Japanese Economic Miracle, 1950s, 1990s, a global powerhouse. The period from the 1950s to the early 1990s is often referred to as the Japanese Economic Miracle, as Japan transformed from a war-torn nation into the world's second-largest economy. Several key factors contributed to this unprecedented rise. Government and corporate cooperation. The government worked closely with businesses, providing loans, subsidies, and policies that favored industrial expansion. This system, often called Japan Incorporated, helped create industrial giants. The keiretsu system. Japan's economy was dominated by large business conglomerates, known as keiretsu, which included powerful companies like Toyota, Mitsubishi, Sony, and Honda. Investment in education and technology. Japan focused on engineering, robotics, and innovation, making it a leader in industries such as automobiles, electronics, and manufacturing. High savings and work ethic. The Japanese people had one of the highest savings rates in the world, allowing for reinvestment in industries, while their strong work ethic fueled productivity. By the 1980s, Japan had become an economic superpower, rivaling even the United States in industries like automobiles, consumer electronics, and robotics. Japanese brands like Sony, Panasonic, Nissan, and Honda dominated global markets, making Japan the leader in technological advancements and exports. 4. The bubble economy and economic stagnation, 1990s, present. While Japan's economy seemed unstoppable, the late 1980s saw an economic bubble, fueled by speculation in real estate and the stock market. Prices soared to unsustainable levels, and by 1991, the bubble burst, leading to a decade-long recession, known as the Lost Decade, 1990s. Deflation and economic stagnation, where prices fell and growth slowed. A declining birth rate, leading to a shrinking workforce and aging population. Despite these setbacks, Japan remained a major global player, shifting its focus toward technology, finance, and global trade. The 2000s and 2010s saw Japan focusing on robotics, artificial intelligence, and digital innovation, maintaining its status as a leader in high-tech industries. 5. Japan's role in the modern world. Today, Japan is known for its strong economy, advanced technology, and cultural influence. Despite economic challenges, Japan remains a top global innovator, leading in areas like automobile and robotics industries, Toyota, Honda, SoftBank Robotics. Video games and entertainment, Nintendo, Sony, anime, and manga. Renewable energy and environmental technology. Japan also plays a major role in global diplomacy, maintaining strong alliances with the United States, the United Nations, and international organizations. It continues to be a leader in peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, and economic partnerships, influencing world affairs in significant ways. Although Japan no longer seeks military dominance, its cultural and technological influence extends across the world. From samurai and cherry blossoms to bullet trains and AI-powered robotics, Japan's history is a testament to its resilience, innovation, and ability to adapt to changing times. Japan's history is a remarkable story of resilience, transformation, and innovation. From its ancient roots as a land of emperors and samurai to its rise as a global economic powerhouse, Japan has continually adapted to the challenges of each era. It overcame the devastation of World War II, rebuilt itself into a world leader in technology and industry, and has maintained a unique cultural identity that blends tradition with modernity. As Japan moves forward, it faces new challenges, such as an aging population and economic shifts, but its spirit of perseverance, innovation, and dedication to excellence ensures that it will remain a key player on the world stage. Whether through its advancements in robotics, environmental sustainability, or cultural influence, Japan continues to inspire the world with its rich history and bright future.